Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Henry Albrecht, the CEO of Limeade. We're going to give about 60 more seconds for people to join and before we kick things off. So thank you very much for attending. We'll be right with you. Okay, this is Henry. We're 30 seconds away from getting started. Thank you all for joining. Bear with us. We will be with you in just a few seconds and we'll get started. All right, well, in the interest of respecting all of your time and also because we have a super exciting topic today, let's jump off here. So we're here today to talk about building an irresistible organization, a place where people can bring their hearts and minds to work every single day. This is Henry Albrecht. I'm the CEO of Limeade, and I'm here with Josh Bersin. And although Josh doesn't need a lot of introduction, I'll just give him a brief one. You may know him as the principal and founder of Bersin by Deloitte, as well as an all-around guru of culture, engagement, HR, technology, and strategy. So really thrilled to have Josh with me here today. Josh, how are you doing?
Great, thank you, Henry.
Good, and I'm going to go through just about 2 or 3 minutes of background before we jump into Josh's main presentation. So why are we here today? I hope that a lot of you have joined today, and thanks for taking time out of your busy days, to think about this topic. Most people out there don't love their jobs, and in fact, this statistic hasn't changed materially in the last 15 years or so. The levels of burnout and disengagement are about the same, and in fact, people are suffering. There's stress, there's opioids, there's robots taking over our jobs, contingent workforces present all kinds of challenges. People are wearing busy like a badge of honor these days, and yet the sense of purpose hasn't been brought to the forefront. And here at Limeade, we believe that true engagement, that real deep emotional connection to work that creates extra energy, comes when people feel good and have a sense of purpose. That's actually our definition of well-being. Today, we're actually going to focus on the connection between well-being and engagement as well. And we know that more engaged employees deliver business results. About 30 to 50 years of HR research have taught us that. And we believe that one of the things missing from this is an immersive approach. You can't just have a bunch of siloed programs out there for aggregating programs to connect to the HR ecosystem, or even just have a whole person approach, which is of course necessary with well-being, but you need to hit people at every single touch point with whole company support. People need to feel cared for and connected to their own purpose and the purpose of the organization to really maximize what we're all about here in building irresistible organizations. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over control to my friend Josh Bersin. Josh, please take it away. You've got keyboard right.
Thank you, Henry. Let's see here. I'm going to click forward.
Or did you?
I don't think it...
Hold on one sec.
Okay.
This is one of those webinar things.
All right.
You can also make him presenter if you need to.
Okay, go ahead.
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Okay, I've got it. All right, well, thank you. The problem of employee engagement, hopefully you guys can see this beautiful picture here. The problem of employee engagement is actually kind of complicated. And so what I'd like to do for the next 40 minutes or so is explain to you 2 things. One is why it's complicated, and second, give you a somewhat holistic picture of some of the dimensions and really factors you have that really can address this issue based on the research we've done. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the drivers of why engagement's an issue today, explain just briefly why I think it is a bit of a crisis, talk about the model we developed, including the importance of well-being, and talk a little bit about what Limeade does, and then what I think you guys can do in the future. And as Henry mentioned in the very intro, most of the issues on people's minds at the moment are automation and technology. And I'm, at the stage of my career where I've been through this multiple times before, and even though there have been quite a few articles about how robots are taking over jobs, and robots can plant flowers and cultivate fields and perform audits for clients and analyze data on our behalf, more jobs are being created now than ever before. In fact, the unemployment rate in the United States is going to go down below 4%. The expected economic, in most parts of the world, in most developed countries, there are a shortage of skills, not too many skills. Now, we don't always have the right people in the right cities where these skills are needed, and that's a big issue for the politicians to deal with. But we haven't run out of jobs, but we are changing them. And what I'll talk about as we get going is one of the uncertainties that concerns HR professionals and business leaders, and to some degree professionals at all levels, is what are the jobs in the future that I can be prepared for as a worker? And what the research shows is that even though there are a lot of technical jobs that have been created, that's a relatively small percentage of the workforce. Only about 5 to 6%, during every industrial revolution, only 5 or 6% of the jobs created are jobs of people building the machines, designing and developing software, for example. 94, 95% of us use them. We use the tools. And so our human services of listening, problem solving, selling, supporting people, serving people, creating, innovating, designing are all the human skills that are needed. And what you can see from this data is that the stock market valuation of companies in the United States, and this is true outside all over the world, have all moved towards more of these intangible skills, meaning that people are even more important in business today, despite all of this automation, than they were 5 or 10 years ago. And in fact, the number of jobs that are moving into service-related roles, and that includes, designing things, not just serving people, are going up also. So employee engagement is a, really business critical issue. It isn't just an issue for HR. Now, added to that is the issue of what's gone on in the economy the last few years. I've been through 4 or 5 economic cycles, and we are in the 10th year of, in fact, maybe the longest economic growth cycle we've had in my career history, reaching the lowest level of unemployment since around the time of the Korean War. Now, what that means for you as a company or you as an HR person might vary by city and by industry, but for most of us, it means the job market is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. It's getting harder and harder to hire people. The birth rate in the United States and in the UK and Canada is below replacement. There aren't as many people entering the workforce right now as there have been in the past. And so we're going to have to get very good at retaining the people we have, attracting people to come work for us. And as most of you know, your employment brand is visible on the internet. It's transparent. Whether you know it or not, it's out on Glassdoor or some other website. And so this issue of engagement is now a business critical issue. and just to drive this point home, this is a survey that was done by the conference board in January or December of CEOs, not HR people. And amongst CEOs in 2018, in 2017, the number one issue on the minds of CEOs was cybersecurity, regulatory risk, immigration, and other issues relative to security. This year, it is people. It is attracting talent, developing leaders, creating a level of fairness in the organization, providing good health care, measuring people well, and creating diverse workforce. So those are all the things that we are here to do. Now, at the same time all that's going on, let me give you another piece of information that's important. Even though we have all these wonderful technologies, and I'm as much a technology person as anybody, it's gotten a little bit too much. We studied this for the last 3 or 4 years here at Deloitte, and 2 or 3 years ago, we wrote a big article called The Overwhelmed Employee, and it pretty much showed, and it continues to show even more every year, that we are not adapting to technology well yet. Most of us feel that we have too much to do. We're spending too much time on our emails or our phones or whatever it may be, the messaging devices we have. We're sending and receiving too much information. We're stuck in traffic. For those of us that live in big cities, we're spending more time commuting. We're working on weekends. We're working at nights. We're getting less sleep. And there's really a little bit of a crisis around this. And I was hoping that this would have been over by now, but it's not. It's actually getting worse. The research that comes out every month from various places shows that the stress levels at work are going up. People are looking for help with mindfulness, with sleep, with relaxation, with focus. There's a lot of consulting firms now trying to solve this problem. And eventually the technology providers will make things better. But right now we're in a proliferation of growth of tools. And because the economy is so good, we're probably getting more things to do at work than we really need. And it has caused problems of overwork. And this is the crisis that Henry was mentioning earlier. And it really is a bit of a crisis. I know in my career, I started working in the 1970s. And I remember quite well the days when I would go to work. I worked at IBM for a while, and I took a briefcase of papers and stuff, and there was no email, and there wasn't even any voicemail the first year or two I worked there. And when I went home at night, that was it. I just went home, and there was no work to do. I never took anything home. These days, we're working a lot more hours. In the United States, we've lost an entire week of vacation on average in the last 15 years, and people are trying to find some way to deal with it. And I think we've probably reached the limit. And amongst millennials, younger people are saying, you know what, that's enough. I don't want to work that much more. There will always be people that are willing to work extra hours, but most of us are saying we've had enough. And this is also playing out in employee engagement surveys. The employee engagement data that I've been looking at for the last decade or so, this is from Glassdoor, but you can see very similar data from most engagement providers, shows that the average employee engagement amongst all the companies listed in the Glassdoor database from 2008, when we were in the depths of a very severe recession, has barely moved. It's gone from 3.11 to 3.2, which is really sort of a sad state that after all the years of growth and economic growth and income growth and tools and software and all these wonderful things that have happened to the economy in the last 10 years, people are about as unhappy or disengaged or engaged as they were during the recession. And what I want to talk to you about is how do you get to the right of this curve? And let me assure you that any one of you, any company can be on the right of this curve. You don't have to be a high-tech company with a gigantic stock price to do that. In fact, the research on the Glassdoor database, and you can find this when you look at the Fortune Best Place to Work surveys and many of the other studies that are done, is that every industry represents companies, has companies that are on the right of this curve, and every industry has companies that are on the left of this curve. And that's really what I'm going to talk about in a couple minutes, is how you get there. And underlying this, let me make one more point, and why we're doing this webinar, why I'm doing this webinar with Henry and Limeade, is this problem of well-being. And I mean, the word well-being, I don't know how long it's been around. Henry's probably been tracking it a lot longer than I have, is becoming a buzzword. It's becoming a meme because we don't know as human beings how to balance work and life as well as we used to. And as I'll show you in a few minutes, the well-being industry or the well-being market or the well-being tool set that used to be provided to reduce insurance costs and offered as a benefit is now becoming a performance tool. It's really becoming a way to think about building a better employee experience. And I don't need to read all these kinds of slides to you, but well-being will be not only an insurance cost for you as a company, but it'll be a performance cost. It'll create turnover, it'll create stress, it'll create low levels of engagement. And so it's something we have to take seriously, and that's why companies like Limeade have become so successful and growing so fast in the marketplace. The last point I want to make in terms of the context of engagement is this, and this is something we're going to be talking about a lot in April when we launched the Human Capital Trends for 2018 is that people have also told us through their surveys and many of the meetings I've had around the world that they're expecting their employers and our businesses to take more responsibility for their actions. In the Deloitte Millennial Survey, which came out in the spring of 2017, so it's about 9 months old now, almost 70% of millennials believe that they will be less financially secure than their families. They are concerned about the fairness, income inequality, inclusion, and income progression of their personal lives, and they are expecting their employers to do something about it. This is why the CEO of BlackRock, the CEO of Merck, the CEO of Salesforce, the CEO of so many well-run companies are taking positions that they're not in business just to make money. They're in business to help all of their stakeholders have a better life, including their shareholders, their customers, their employees, their business partners, their communities, and that's really another change that's taken place in the world of work. And one more piece of data on that I think is fascinating. There's an organization around the world that produces an annual report called the World Happiness Report. And this is a survey that they send to millions of people, ask them to rate their happiness using a 1 to 10 scale. It's called a Cantrell ladder is the name of it, but it's basically a 1 to 10 rating, similar to a Net Promoter Score. And they found, for example, when I looked at the data, that in the United States, if you just do an analysis of some of the happiest countries, and the happiest countries in the world happen to be the Nordic countries, by the way, and you compare them to the United States, over the last decade, in the United States, our happiness has gone down by about 6%, whereas in the Nordics, it's gone up by about 11%. And the statistical correlation of what contributes to happiness in this research is 4 things. Health. Do you feel good about your physical health? Are you healthy? Are you able to get up in the morning and go to work and do the things you want to do and have a happy life? Your income. Do you have enough money to support yourself, buy good food, have a house, roof over your head, send your kids to college and so forth? Your sense of social support. Do you have friends, community, people that you interact with, that you're a family? And do you trust the institutions around you? And interestingly enough, if you look at this particular data set and you compare the Nordics to the US, we are a little bit better off financially. We are a little bit better off health-wise. We are significantly worse off in our sense of social support and our sense of trust. And that has resulted in us being less happy. And if you look at the correlation of this data, in this particular example, if you wanted the United States to be as happy as the Nordics, we would have to have a GDP that was 3 times larger than it is today. And so my point of this data is to say that you as an employer, as an HR professional, as a business leader, have an opportunity to address those 2 issues on the right, creating a sense of collective belonging at work and creating a sense of trust at work are very significant drivers of engagement. So the question is, what do you do? How do you do this? What are the elements? Do you give people free food? Do you have exercise facilities at work? I mean, I just threw everything I could think of in here, and I missed a bunch of things that could possibly result in an improvement in engagement and energy. And I think one of the things that, one of the ways to think about this, and I'll show you our model in a minute, and this was some of the early thinking we did when we've been doing this for quite a while, is go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a pretty easy to understand way of understanding what drives people. People need physical health and wellness. They need enough money to support themselves. We want benefits that'll take care of our insurance and our health care. They want safety. They want psychological safety and physical safety, and that means things like diversity and inclusion are important because they give you a sense of security and safety that you're being well represented at work. They want love and belonging, which means they want to be part of a small team where they know people and people feel that they're respected. They want to accomplish something in life, which means they want to progress in their jobs, and they want to achieve some sense of self-actualization, which is mission and purpose. And if you look at those things I've written down here, they basically were the core of the model that we developed 2.5, 3 years ago called Simply Irresistible. And so what I'd like to do for the next, probably 15 or 20 minutes is walk you through this. And you can read more about this on the Bersin website and on the Deloitte website and explain to you what some of these things are so you can put them into your thinking. And then at the end, we'll wrap up and talk more about what's going on in the area of well-being and defining well-being. So there's really 5 areas of work that drive engagement. And let me make one preface comment, and that is that, in my opinion, and this is just me talking, work is not designed to make people happy. Being happy is an outcome of work. It is not the goal of work. We go to work for a sense of achievement, for a sense of progress, for a sense of self-esteem. And if the work environment is positive, we will be happy as a result. So don't think that you have to have parties all day or give people cakes and do things that are, have balloons to make people happy at work. People actually will be happy at work if you do some of the things that are shown on this picture. So we basically broke it down into 5 essential elements. Meaningful work, having a sense of progression and a job that fits, hands-on supportive management, a work environment which is flexible and humane, opportunities to grow, and trust in leadership. And let me walk through them one at a time and just give you a few insights on each one. So in the area of work and jobs, there's really 4 things that you have to think about. First of all, do the jobs in your company give people enough autonomy that they can express themselves as individuals in these jobs? One of the reasons machines are taking over so many jobs is we have a lot of jobs at work that are frankly boring jobs. They're routine work, which can be automated. And even though automating a piece of work might do away with a particular role, it will create a job for somebody to do something more creative. One of the more interesting books on this particular topic is a book called Good Jobs, written by an MIT professor, and she gives examples of retail organizations where they have deliberately overstaffed the retail stores. In other words, they have too many people working in the retail stores, giving people more freedom and flexibility to rearrange the shelves, clean the store, serve customers, giving them more autonomy, and they in turn are more profitable businesses. So the idea of reducing costs through reduction in labor is actually converse to reality. So giving people even if you're just a truck driver, is a very positive contributor to work. The second is selecting people for the right job. And for those of you in the recruiting space that do recruiting, you know how hard this can be. Not everybody is good at every job. We all have our God-given gifts and the things that we're good at and the things we like to do. And the match between the job and the person is difficult, and not everybody's good at it. But we have to do a good job of selection, because when we select the right people, they thrive and they enjoy their work. We've done many studies on this, and the one that I think is the most interesting that just comes to my mind right now is we did a study with a retailer and looked at the role of cosmetics salesperson. And the typical hiring pattern of a cosmetic salesperson is to look for somebody who's very good at putting on makeup and looks really nice, and therefore they will be a good representative of the cosmetics products. And what the study actually found was that the highest performing cosmetic salespeople were not those who were necessarily the best at, making themselves up. They were actually the very high cognitive skills, a lot of quick thinking skills, because it's actually a very technical role. And so they changed the hiring pattern of people in those jobs, and they found that the engagement, retention, and performance levels went way up. So think seriously about who the high performers are in various roles, and what have you learned about them that you can help other people select exactly the right roles for those jobs. The third is to have small teams. I've done business function, a big operation, a big department. Your relationship with the half a dozen people you work with every day is more important than almost anything else in your sense of belonging at work. And so there's a really veritable plethora of tools and books and articles now being written on teams and how teams can be better managed. And this is an area where most HR departments haven't done enough work yet. And the fourth is to give people time. And that gets back to this idea of the overwhelmed employee. If you don't have time during the day to reflect, to rest, to think, to relax, to talk to other people, to improve your work environment, to teach yourself things, you're not going to thrive. And so we actually have to understaff a little bit more and give people a little more time and reduce their workload in order to succeed. So that's a little bit about that one. Number two is what we call hands-on management. And many, many books and articles have been written about the fact that people leave managers, not organizations. And there's some truth to that, and there's some fallacy to that. But because more and more we're finding that people actually don't spend as much time with their managers as they used to, because we're working in much more highly empowered jobs. But there's really four aspects to management that our research have uncovered. The first is to have clarity and transparency of goals. What am I being held responsible for? How will I be measured? What can I tell other people? Do other people know what I'm working on? Can I share that with other people? Are my goals relevant? Are my goals achievable? Can I talk to somebody about my goals? Are they up to date? That is number one. And that's a management technique that is sometimes embedded into good management, sometimes not. And one of the things that's going on in HR right now, as most of you know, is a really big reinvention of the process of setting goals and doing performance management. The second is having a coaching or supportive relationship with your boss, not purely an evaluative relationship. And this is something that has changed over time. A decade ago, and certainly 2 decades ago, bosses were mostly there to organize work and evaluate our performance. While that's still true, that is much, much less the role of a boss today. In an empowered environment where people are doing more creative work, we have more service-related roles, the boss's job is much more that of a coach, an advisor, a developer of people, than as a boss evaluating people. So we've done research on this, and you can look at your management practices and determine, are you assessing people as managers by their evaluative skills or by their coaching skills? And we've seen a massive shift towards coaching as the role of managers. Which gets me to number 3, investment in the development of management. Being a manager, being a supervisor is not a natural progression for most people. Some people it comes naturally, but for most people it doesn't. It takes time to learn how to contribute through the efforts of others. It takes time to learn how to be a good leader and be a good coach and be a good listener. And if we don't invest in management and supervisory training and support, we won't do that. If you look at the $160, $170 billion learning and development industry around the world, about 15 to 20% of that is going into management, leadership, and supervisory training. And I think that's an area where most companies are continuously struggling, and something that you really have to focus on even if you're a small company. And the fourth is developing a performance management process which is agile and open and transparent. And I won't spend a lot of time on this because this has been a huge topic in HR for quite a while, is really the performance management process of the past, which was a once a year, here's your rating, thank you very much, I'm giving you a 2% raise, is really gone away. I mean, it's really becoming obsolete. We're really introducing a whole new set of tools and techniques for what we call continuous performance management to encourage and facilitate leaders having regular conversations with people, giving them feedback on a regular basis, getting feedback from others, and having a regular discussions about progression and development. The third area of becoming irresistible is the environment. And, you know, when we use the word environment, we really are talking about the entire work environment, not just the physical office. The first area here is flexibility. And this is one most companies have pretty much dealt with. Letting people work at home, letting people work in other locations, giving people the flexibility to move around, letting them have a stand-up desk. Maybe you let people bring dogs to work. Maybe you let people pick their own computers. All sorts of interesting things you can do to make the work environment more flexible. And as jobs move away from more routine work, flexibility becomes more and more of a requirement. Now, you can go too far with flexibility. A lot of companies have now realized that letting everybody work at home all the time is not always a good thing. People do have to come into the office. They have to be physically close to each other to collaborate and get to know each other. But generally speaking, one of the biggest causes of stress is a lack of flexibility at work. And actually, studies have shown that people have heart attacks and very, very poor health outcomes when they feel they do not have flexibility at work, when they feel they're going to get fired if they miss a shift. So these are things that are, really becoming pretty well known and important principles in the work environment. The second is the workplace. And we've got some interesting studies. I think I put the chart in here on the workplace. I don't think I included it. But there's different workplaces needed for different types of work. At Deloitte, we're all mostly consultants, so we have people pretty much moving around constantly. So we really don't have desks. And many companies are set up that way. In your company, you're going to have some people that are going to be locked to their desk because of the type of work they do, because of the people they serve, because of the functions of their role. And you're going to have other people that need to move around. And we need to give people work environments that are flexible enough to meet their needs. We have lots of creativity around the workforce in this area. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, where there's no lack of creativity in the work environment. And that means giving people quiet space too when they need it. In the early 2000s, we had a big wave of companies that did away with cubicles and did away with offices and created these massive open spaces for people to sit at desks. It was actually kind of a problem for people. There was no privacy, there was no ability to focus. We couldn't really collaborate well because there wasn't enough private space. So you really have to work on this and listen to your employees and look at the kind of work they do, and we have some tools that can help you do that. The third is a culture of recognition. Interestingly enough, when you say thank you to someone, when you appreciate someone, there is a chemical reaction that takes place in that person who's receiving the thank you. Oxytocin is actually released, which is a hormone that actually makes people feel better and more collaborative at work. So a simple thank you, a simple appreciation, a bonus, an award, a contest, whatever it may be, social recognition tools are pretty proliferating in the market, and I think it might even be built into Limeade, to be honest, are very, very significant contributors to engagement. We did a study of this back in 2012 and 2013, and we found that the companies that had a high pattern of recognition, a culture of recognition, had 31% lower voluntary attrition rates than those that did not. And this doesn't mean you have to give everybody bonuses and pay them all sorts of money. In fact, that actually isn't even as effective. What's more effective is actually having a culture of appreciation and really having a growth mindset where you understand that everybody at work can contribute in their own personal way if they're given the right conditions and the right role and the right support. And that's a very important part of the environment. The fourth part is the one that's been discussed, really incessantly for the last couple of years, and that is diversity and inclusion, fairness, removal of bias, bending over backwards to make sure that all talent decisions, who you hire, who you promote, how you pay people, are all done in a fair and unbiased way. A big area of HR and something that's been discussed a lot. We've done research that shows, for example, if you look at dozens and dozens of talent practices, and we looked at about 100 talent practices in this study, those that drive the highest level of business performance are those that promote inclusivity, fairness, and transparency. People know and feel that they will be fairly recognized or not recognized for their work, and they understand why decisions are made. I just looked at a piece of research this morning from a recognition and rewards company that said that 83% of managers do not know how to explain to their employees why they got the raise they got. That's an example of a lack of transparency and, probably potentially lack of inclusion. We need to be more transparent with information and more transparent with our talent decisions, and that's a very significant driver of engagement. Okay. Which gets to this issue of well-being, and let me just talk about this chart for a minute. No matter how good your work environment is, how pretty it is, how much free food you have, how nice the desks are, how nice the computers are, it may be a sweatshop. And I'm not going to mention any company names, but I know some tech companies that have the most glorious food and benefits where people work 18, 20 hours a day at times. And so it's really up to you to decide as an HR department where you fit on this scale of well-being. Human beings, unlike computers, need rest. We need social relationships. We have families. You saw the data on happiness. We have to have relationships with other people. And well-being has moved and is really pretty quickly moving out of a world of health and wellness into a world of human performance. And so the more you think about engagement as a measure of human energy and a measure of human performance, the better you're going to be at really dealing with all the issues at work that get in people's way. And one of the big themes of HR right now is the employee experience. And just about every HR department I go to has got a project to try to understand the employee experience. And I would say that's a really important and noble cause. But what you find is that in most organizations, the things that trip people up, the things that cause trouble, the things that create stress are a whole bunch of little tiny things that are getting in the way. At Deloitte, for example, there used to be a policy that you had to fly on Sunday night and be at a client on Monday morning. And, you know, that creates incredible amounts of stress amongst people that have families, kids, spouses, which virtually everybody. And 5 years ago, that procedure or that rule was essentially done away with, and we came up with a more flexible way of doing consulting. You have things like that in all aspects of your company that you need to look at. And that's the reason, for example, that tools like Limeade, and I'll let Henry talk to you about it in a minute, are so important. When you look at the entire experience of well-being, including people's physical health, their mental health, their financial health, and their level of sleep, their level of self-awareness, their level of mindfulness, it has a huge impact on their feeling of engagement, their feeling of retention, their ability and willingness to recommend your company as a place to work. So this is becoming a core focus of HR and a core focus of businesses going forward, which, by the way, is affecting the HR technology market in a big way. The HR technology market, which is a $20 or $25 billion marketplace, is filled with tools for all of these things. Every one of these little circles is, one or more vendors in this market. All of that is colliding upon your employees. And I think one of the reasons companies like Limeade have such an enormous potential in the market, and I'll let Henry talk to you more about it, is that they have pulled a lot of these tools together into a platform that allow employees to take advantage of many of these things at the same time. The fourth element of the model in the Simply Irresistible Model is growth. And let me just take 1 minute on this. A really interesting book that, if you like to read, which I do a lot, about these kinds of topics, is a book called The Progress Principle by a professor from Harvard, or I think she's a psychologist actually, Teresa Amabile. And what she did is she went through the job logs, the work logs of hundreds and hundreds of employees in different jobs, and read them and tried to figure out what was it about people's jobs that gave them a sense of satisfaction and happiness. And what she concluded after analyzing a lot of this data is that the biggest thing that affects people positively every day at work is having a sense of making progress, completing something, pushing something forward, finishing something. You know the feeling when you have a day where you just feel like you didn't get anything done because you had too many meetings or too many emails or too many distractions. You go home feeling kind of crummy. And I think this is some form of essential human desire we have to make progress in our lives. And this is true at work. And we can create work environments that encourage and foster a sense of progress without necessarily making sure everybody gets promoted every day, because that's impossible. And there's really 4 parts to this. One is giving people training and support on the job through tools, through coaching, through supportive management, through an on-demand learning environment. The second is letting people advance in their career in multiple directions. Not everyone will be promoted every year, maybe not every 2 or 3 years, but I'd like a new assignment. I'd like a new project. I'd like to learn something new. I'd like to coach somebody else. I'd like an opportunity to work in a new discipline. I'd like an opportunity to learn a new skill. Those are all positive things which most people want if they're given the opportunity. The career models of the past, where you got promoted every 3 to 5 years, won't necessarily accommodate that. So that's number 2. Number 3 is creating an environment for self-directed learning. most human beings are pretty good at teaching themselves things. They'll read, they'll watch videos, they'll go online, they'll search, they'll scratch around and try to find the answers to problems. If we give them an opportunity to do that, they will flourish. Now, the learning and development industry has had a lot of problems the last decade, keeping up with the rapid pace of change in digital learning and micro-learning and video-based learning, but that's changed now. You can now buy digital learning tools that are as easy to use as YouTube or Netflix in just about any size company at a modest cost. So that's number 3. And number 4 is having a culture of learning. And this gets back to number 2, which is management. If managers are not incented to listen to mistakes, give people time to reflect, give people an opportunity to develop, reward people for internal development, coach and support people on the job, then it won't happen. People will not find the time, and they will not do it. So all of this is part of item number 4. And this is sort of a little picture that I think is kind of a nice way to think about this, that I wrote about actually several years ago. If you think about your progression in a job, it tends to go like this, where you go through these fits and starts of productivity and growth, and then plateau, and then growth, and learning new things, and it goes on and on and on. And at any given point in time, if you get a new assignment or a set of new skills, your productivity or your progress will grow at a faster rate, and you will develop a higher level of engagement. And that's what we're trying to do, is build a work experience where all of us are moving into these red lines as often as we possibly can. Now, we obviously have to get our jobs done, and we have to finish the work that we started in the process. But it's not that hard to build an environment where people are learning all the time. And it doesn't matter what job you're in. And this can be in a manufacturing environment, if you're a truck driver, regardless. Everybody has an opportunity to progress. And it's interesting, when you look at the data on careers and learning, which I do a lot, there's a lot of change going on right now. It's the fastest growing area of HR technology and one of the fastest growing areas of trends in HR. The last one I want to talk about, and then we'll go back and do some Q&A, is leadership. All of these things that I talked about, which are great programs for HR, L&D, talent management, learning, so forth, really fall short if there isn't a sense of trust and purpose and mission amongst leadership. And I mentioned in the beginning how important trust is in our personal happiness. It's particularly important at work, especially now. Companies have found, and if I use an example of Salesforce.com, which is a very highly regarded company here in the Bay Area, all over the world really, that giving people an opportunity to be a part of their community, to give back, to know that the company is investing in them during good times and bad. Listen, it's easy to invest in your people when things are going well, but what do you do when things are going poorly? Those are the times when you're tested, and that's really a role of leadership. We've looked at the data on this. It comes through over and over and over again. If you correlate, for example, whether your employees will rate your company as a great place to work in Glassdoor, the most highly correlated factor in an employee's willingness to rate their company high is not their salary, it's not work-life balance, it's not even career. It's a sense of culture and values and purpose. If you feel like you're part of something greater than yourself, it gives you a sense of energy at work. And studies have shown this, and this is a book that's a little bit old, but well worth looking at if you're interested in this topic. A study that was done by Raj Sisodia and a set of other academics that looked at companies that define their mission and purpose through a greater good to society, to multiple stakeholders, to being good citizens, and found that those companies outperform their peers by a factor of 8 over a 20-year period. I just had an interview 2 weeks ago with the CEO of Merck, for example, who's actually a very interesting executive who's basically made a very big point, and he's interviewed in HBR this week, of talking about how important it is for even a pharmaceutical company to define its mission in the context of well-being of the whole society, not just the people that buy their pharmaceuticals and their services. And that's regardless if you're a bank, a retailer, a consulting firm, a manufacturer, or whatever, you can do that. And And in some cases, this is called having a company with soul. So anyway, that's a sort of a very quick overview of the Simply Irresistible Model. Let me just wrap it up and turn it back over to Henry, and we'll do a little Q&A, and just conclude that throughout all of this, the concept of well-being, both physical, mental, financial, and otherwise, and spiritual, is really underlying the world of work. Machines are going to take away more and more of the drudge routine work we have, leaving us all with jobs that are more human every day. And we will become better and better at those jobs if we feel good physically and mentally about our work, about our workplace, and about our personal experiences at work. So I can't emphasize enough how important this topic is, and I hope this was an educational overview of some of the drivers of engagement at work. Okay, Henry, thank you very much.
Great.
Back over to you guys.
Well, that was an inspirational ending. I just want to thank Josh for giving another fresh view, like he always does, about changing landscape. And also, I like your point about the progress principle. I feel like meetings like this, thoughts like this, discussions like this are helping us make the progress that we all got into this business to make in the first place. So thank you. I'd love to encourage the audience to type in any questions that you have. We've got a few minutes left. We'll get to as many as we can, and the ones we don't get to, we will be able to share this recording and perhaps follow up with other materials as well. So that said, first question for you, Josh, and maybe I'll chime in too, as well as it says, we have different budgets for many of these programs: well-being, engagement, inclusion, diversity. How do we get the C-suite on board to cross these budgets?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily an issue of having separate, well, I guess a couple answers. First of all, if the C-suite is questioning your budgets for these programs, I would really encourage you to make sure someone, you or your head of HR or whatever, is having a conversation with the C-suite about why we are doing these things. And most business execs are going to be much more focused on things like revenue growth, productivity, profitability, cost reduction. And I think you can make an argument that all the stuff I just went through for 45 minutes, which is all HR baloney, at the bottom line, it's about growing the business. It's about being more profitable, having a lower turnover rate, being more innovative, doing a better job of taking care of customers. What I like to, the comment I like to make, and you're happy to, steal this, is every company, people are your product. And if you go to a CEO and ask him or her, what is on your mind? What are the problems that you think we have? They're probably going to talk about things like, oh, we're not innovative enough. We didn't do a good job of customer service. Our sales department's not doing the right job of selling. Our marketing sucks. Whatever it is they say, it's eventually going to come down to a people issue. And that's your opportunity to go back and say, well, that problem is a result of our inability to coach people, or our inability for people to feel included, whatever. So if you go back around the conversation in that fashion, you'll land exactly where you want. And he or she will then say, well, what are we doing to fix that? And there you go. That's your answer. That's your opportunity.
Yeah, Josh, I think we're seeing that too, and it can be bidirectional. I would say sometimes the business unit digs deep enough into their business problem. Like, okay, sales are flagging in our retail stores. Why? The customer experience isn't great. Why? They're not being treated well by the people who are serving them. Why? Because those people are bitter and don't feel trusted. So sometimes the business unit is driving this connection back to well-being. And then sometimes, obviously, there are many practitioners maybe on the call of well-being who are thinking about things like citizenship and community and inclusion and teamwork and recognition and appreciation and well-being and care. They're pushing the direct, the business results discussion from their side, saying, look, did you see that when people have well-being and feel cared for, they deliver, 50% better sales results? So I think the convergence of these things it has to have a push on both sides, and sometimes that means it has to have a very senior level advocate who believes in that connection. So anyway, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the thing you don't want to do is position all this stuff as a benefit. It is a benefit, but it's much, much bigger than that. It's much more important than that. It's a mandatory performance enhancing infrastructure for the company. I don't think you're going to be able to run a company without these kinds of programs, period. It's just not, you're not going to be successful.
Actually, that's a good segue to this next question, which is, in the Simply Irresistible framework, where do you think employee well-being programs fit in? And maybe that's the point you were just making, but do you have anything else to add to that?
Well, you know, it's funny. When we developed the framework, it was about 3 years ago, we didn't have, it wasn't in there. It belongs in there. We probably need another box somewhere. It sort of fits into the environment, the third one, where we call it the humane environment, but I think the well-being program probably needs to be more explicitly called out. And I think it's not a well-being program, it's a well-being mentality. It's a philosophy of well-being. It's a philosophy that we're going to do things in the business that allow organizational endurance and that deliver products and services in a positive way. You go to an oil company, and I just had an oil company out here yesterday. Safety is critical. Every meeting starts with a safety discussion. I feel like well-being needs to be like that. It needs to be one of these sort of underlying, almost compliance-related topics that have to be part of work.
Except, Josh, I would interrupt and say, except it has to feel like it's done for you instead of to you. I think compliance sometimes gets a bad name because it's something you have to do. To us, sometimes it's as simple as having every manager trained on ask, how are you at the start of every meeting? And I actually have a good consultant associate who keeps a Post-it note on her to-do list that says, ask about weekend, because she's, you know, naturally on to the next task all the time and needs a reminder. Mm-hmm. And sometimes technology can help with that, but sometimes it's a Post-it note to say, how are you and how you're doing? So that's important. And in case we have a few more questions coming in, and I'll ask them. In case you don't get your question answered on this webinar, we'd also like to encourage you all to meet Josh in person or say hello and ask questions, as he will be keynoting our Linemate Engage conference on April 18th and 18th and 19th. You can learn more at our website. That's the only 10 seconds of advertising we will provide. And then back to the next question. It says here, since you cannot, quote, fix, unquote, all of the elements of the Simply Irresistible model at the same time, how does the approach help your organization prioritize which elements or levers to take action on first? That's for you, Josh.
You know, it's a good question. And the answer is it's going to vary by work group, by department, by manager, by location. That's why we have this wonderful marketplace of surveys, of pulse surveys that's exploded. I skipped over the slide because I didn't want to do too much stuff, but you need to have, in organizations need to have a listening mechanism where we are pulsing people for information and we're listening and applying it against the framework. So you might find in one part of the company, there's no growth, there's no career opportunities. Another part of the company, there's no time for slack. Another part of the company, management's behaving like whatever, 2-year-olds. I don't know. It's going to vary by location. It's going to vary by business discipline, sometimes around the world. And one of your jobs is to get that information, to open up the lines of communication, and to use these new tools that are available to allow people to communicate with you what's going on in their work environment so you can do something about it.
Yeah, that's great, Josh. Actually, I was going to say, although there's wide variability, as you pointed out, some research that Linemate did with Quantum Workplace in 2016 really reinforced something that you spent time on in your presentation today, which is the role of trust. I would say and feeling engaged in work. And what we actually broke down, what is trust made of? What is a trusting culture made of? And the top 4 things that rose to the surface were, 1, you have to value the whole person. So that kind of ties into that whole person well-being connection. 2, you have to trust your people. In other words, some of the things you talked about with empowering and autonomy and mastery and learning, that's about trusting them to learn and grow and do a great job. then they have to feel trusted. They have to trust you, and you have to trust them. And then lastly, they have to feel like they have the resources and tools to do their job. And I think you pointed out quite well, technology can help here, but technology can also go overboard here. So you have to have the right kind of simple unifying approach is our philosophy, and not maybe have 20 systems to log into, but have one clear statement that you care about people. So anyway, let's see if there's any more questions. One is about organizational support at the manager level. It says here, how can managers show support for people when the rest of the company doesn't?
Well, I don't know what the rest of the company means, but I mean, the managers run the company, not HR. And our job as business or HR people is to create an environment where managers can be good at what they do. And I sense the question might be about leadership, and maybe you have a problem where your top leadership is not paying attention to these issues or aware of them. I mean, listen, I've been the CEO of a company. You know, CEOs have stresses of their own. You know, they're trying to make money, they're trying to deal with shareholders, they have boards of directors, whatever it may be. Your job is to communicate why these issues are in their best interest. Some of them may have grown up in very traditional organizations where they weren't concerned about this stuff. Look, like I said, in the 1970s and the 1980s, nobody cared about this. Work wasn't so difficult. We didn't have all this stress and 24/7 working. So that is one of the things we're paid to do in HR, is communicate this value proposition and make it clear to people using data, using stories. I mean, you know, I have to laugh. You know, yesterday there was this big flurry of discussion about compensation at one of the nation's largest airlines. I don't know if you guys caught the news on that yesterday. Somebody made a decision to change the way the airline was paying people, and within 24 hours there was so much flurry of unhappiness from the employees. They went and reversed the entire decision they had made. Leaders have to be sensitive to that stuff. And like I said, there's no businesses left where you can count on your employees to always act on your behalf if you're not helping them too. So anyway, I probably don't need to talk much more about that, but your ability to interact with and educate business leaders is part of your job in HR.
Yeah, that's great. And it sounds basically from your presentation today that it's not just the leaders, it's the leaders, it's the physical environment, it's the teams and peers and managers. It's really a kind of a brand thinking and employee experience thinking. So at the end of the hour, thank everybody. I'm going to leave it with Josh to have the last word. Again, this is Henry Albrecht from Limeade. Thank you all for joining. Josh, in 30 seconds or a minute, what are you excited about in the next 5 years in HR, in the world of HR?
I think, I mean, the speech, I'm working on a keynote for our conference, which is called The Rise of the Individual in the World of Work. I'm excited about the fact that I think we're coming out of a rough time in the workforce where the work environment got away from us. And I think all of the conversations about well-being and employee experience and engagement that are going on now are going to make our lives better. And I don't think we're going to have any choice. Employees can go out on the public internet, they can complain, they can post things online, they can speak up. The Me Too movement, all the things that have come public in the last 24 months, 12 to 24 months, those are signs of moving in the right direction. So I think the world of work is going to get better. And your roles, for those of you on this webinar in HR, are going to be more important than ever. You guys have landed in the most wonderful profession that I could have ever imagined. I landed here by accident myself. And I think our jobs in business are going to be very, very important going forward. And I feel the same way about Limeade and the business that you're in too, Henry. You guys are adding a huge amount of value in all of our personal and professional lives. And so I just think it's an exciting time to be in this domain, and I think we're all going up and to the right. That's my feeling about it.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh, and see you all next month in Savannah, Georgia. Have a great day.
Thanks, Henry.